Hi, welcome to the Small Shed. This week I'm going to show you how I put the roof on, and that's coming up next. Now there are many ways to roof a shed. I'm just really going to run through how I did this because it's suited my circumstances. But I'll just quickly run through the favourite options that there are for doing a shed roof in terms of configuration first, and have a look at those. Now to start with a suspend belief and treat this as a small shed. The most simple form of any sort of roof is a flat roof. You would just basically run joists across the top of the walls, and then you'd put a flat roof covering of plywood, OSB, anything like that on top, and probably a small fascia just to cover up the end of the joists, and that would give you perfectly adequate roof, no problem. It's probably the most economical in terms of the materials used, but the biggest problem is that flat roofs are notoriously maintenance hungry. You will find that the covering that you use, unless you use a high rubber type material, which is quite expensive, if you use normal roofing felt, it's got a limited life and water will tend to lie on top of the roof and you get moss and all sorts of things on top. Essentially you would not have a flat roof anyway. It's a bit of a misnomer. What you should really do is put a slight tilt on it so that there would be a slight fall on the roof, so to one side to go into a gutter. But even so, it's not an ideal solution. It is a solution and it's an economical one, so I didn't want to go down that route. The next step up effectively is a pent roof, which is just like a flat roof but exaggerated. That's just a single pitch that would go up like that, and you'd have a higher back wall than the front wall, and that would give you quite a steep pitch on the roof. Similar sort of thing, it gives you probably less roof construction than a traditional pitch. You get the advantages of being able to put a covering on like metal cladding, or you can use felt, you could use tile even up down above about 11 or 12 degrees, and that will give a better solution than a flat roof in my opinion, but it's a very similar sort of thing. You've just effectively taken the flat roof and just cranked it up a bit. Now I've opted for a pitched roof, which is probably the most popular and common way of doing it, but you can probably see that highlights pretty much where the problems start, because the load is being transmitted, instead of straight down into the walls, it's actually trying to push them apart. So that's why we need some form of roof truss or support to stop that ridge piece falling down. Now you can do it by putting a ridge on either end of the shed, shaped like that, and putting a ridge board along the top, and then you would put a joist or a rafter going up to that with a cutout on it, and that would solve the problem. Or you can go for a truss, which is what I've done. I've gone for trusses because they not only stop the walls spreading, they give you good transmission of forces through from the roof into the walls effectively. So that's what I did. I made trusses out of the cheap CLS timber, little gussets of plywood, and that has proved perfectly satisfactorily. The old shed I had a rudimentary truss in the middle which failed pretty much and left a sag in the roof where it spread the walls slightly, but I'm not experiencing any sort of problems with this. As with most things, I think I've probably done a lot of overkill on the roof on here, but I'll just now run through on the mock-up of the actual shed itself what I've done at the wall plate and roof level. So this then is a typical section through the wall and a piece of the roof of the shed. The panels that I built were there, and because there were 3 panels on either side bolted together, I felt that first of all I needed something on top of them to keep them all in a straight line and secure them together, just to stop them floating about separately, because if you get 2 or 3 panels together they're inclined to move like that if you leave them unrestrained. So first of all I put a slightly larger CLS timber across the top of them. That not only covered the top of the cladding, where there was actually a cut edge in many places because of the working out where it actually ended. You'll never get it to end on exactly on the end of a piece of cladding, so there were some raw edges on the top. That covers that and provides a drip over the top. It gives a bit more bearing for the joists and rafters and things that are going on top, and it then also gave a bit more strength to that length of wall that was all being held together by that top rail. That enabled me to fix a guttering on the front, and then on top of that I could have just gone by putting the truss, which is that part, straight on top of the plate, but the problem I had is all related to not wanting too much overhang, not wanting it to come too low down. If I had a big overhang, it gave me a problem with getting around between the shed and the house, because there isn't a lot of room widthways. And if I go down too low, I end up coming down below the top of the door, which is actually coming in at pretty much at that level, so I had to be fairly careful without having to reduce the door size too much. So that truss has to go on top of the wall plate here. But as you can see, the end of the truss, if you just put that onto a normal piece of CLS timber without any great overhang, which I didn't want, you haven't got a great deal of strength in that, because you're effectively bearing the whole way to the roof on that thickness of material, tapering to nothing. The thicker, wider plate would be helpful, but it still doesn't solve the problem that you're not really bearing much of the truss load on much of this timber. You know, the rest, it needn't be any thicker than that. So I cheated slightly, and I've put in a piece of timber like that, which goes at the top of the wall plate. That is screwed down fairly securely, and that gave me a much bigger area to land the truss onto. You can see it there. It gives you a much better bearing area to spread that load into the walls. Again, it's probably overkill, but it is working okay. That enabled me then to put a proper truss clip on there to hold the truss in, and then I can just put whatever covering I want to on there. That could have been plywood, OSB, scrap timber of any description, metal. I've opted for the insulated metal sheets. You could put twin wall polycarbonate, corrugated plastic, see-through to get more light in, or just you can get a bitumen type corrugated material. Anything really will then rest on top of that. So that's really what I did there, and because of that piece that I've added in, I then actually then put effectively another piece of timber along between those sections, which the whole thing has raised the roof up slightly. It's pushed me closer to my 2.5 metre height limit that I've got, because I'm right on the boundary, and anything above 2.5 metres I would have needed planning consent for. But I think it's just about right, and I've just about got away with that, I think, in terms of height. The roof covering then will go on top of that, the cladding or whatever else you're using. I'm using the metal cladding. And then the gutter is just in the right place for it to drop into at the end of the cladding. So then you've got good drainage, a little bit of an overhang, and that solves the problem. So that's the arrangement I've got in the shed. Internally you can see there's not too much intrusion into the shed with those pieces. That is the truss there, that it's got the support onto that, and I've put those supports go in on the two main trusses that I've got, which support most of the way to the roof, and that's where the joints in the metal cladding on top are. There are two more joists in here that I didn't bother with that arrangement because they were only put in as supplementary ones to just take a bit of load for loading out storage above, and they actually just sit straight on the wall plate, so they have not got that arrangement on them. What you can see there is that I've also got a ridge board running through, which I've used to support the roof sheeting itself, and tie the trusses together to stop them having any tendency to fall over one way or the other. So again, probably belt and braces, but it does mean that I can walk around on top of the roof without any fear of it collapsing in on the rest of the shed. So having dealt with the support work in the form of the trusses that I made, I then just put some rubber strips up the slope of the trusses to spread the load from the cladding itself, and I bought some, as I mentioned before, 2 lengths of 7 metres of cladding that was 1 metre wide from a place down in Gloucester that was olive green and the right colour for the shed, and they cut it up for me into just over 2.5 metre lengths so that I could bring that back on the roof of the car, cut it to size at home with an angle grinder and a small disc cutter, and that's given me the best of all worlds. It's an industrial roof sheeting basically with a plastic coating on it. The inside is the self-finished white that you can see up here. It's insulated so I don't get any condensation. It's coloured the same as the shed on the outside, and it's very rigid and solid, so it didn't really need any more than 2 intermediate trusses really to support it. It locks itself one on top of the other to form a watertight seal, and it just allowed me to cut the back away slightly at the bottom so there was a drip for the water to run down the main roof covering and then into the gutter. And it's a very cost-effective solution as far as I'm concerned. The whole of the roof, including the trusses and the flashings that I bought as well on eBay, probably have come in at less than £250, which may sound a lot, but when you start getting 2 or 3 sheets, I think I'd have needed 3 sheets of plywood on the roof, and they were £40 or £50 a piece. And then you need insulation, and you need something to seal it with, and then you've still got to do the flashings and that around the edges. So I think it's come up with the right solution for the shed. So next week I'll be looking at the foundations and the floor in the shed, and I look forward to seeing you then. Bye.